Hello, this is saxophonist Antonio Parker, and this is a conversation in jazz, where we are promoting jazz through telling the stories. Today, our guest artist is master bass clarinetist, composer, arranger, and band leader, Mr. Todd Marcus. We ask you to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell icon so we can let you know when we are posting another video or going live. We also ask you to donate to our Cash App in order to support the channel and help us to produce future videos. Our Cash App is $Jazzology 101. That's $Jazzology 101. Enjoy the video. Hi, this is saxophonist Antonio Parker, and this is a conversation in jazz. Our guest today is a master bass clarinetist, composer, arranger, and band leader. He is one of the few artists worldwide to focus exclusively on the bass clarinet as a solo instrument. Based in Baltimore, Maryland, he leads several ensembles under his own name, which includes the Todd Marcus Quartet, Todd Marcus Trio, the Todd Marcus Duo, and his nonet, the Todd Marcus Jazz Orchestra, where he features his original compositions as well as arrangements of some of the great jazz standards. Please welcome my good brother, Mr. Todd Marcus. What's up, good brother? How you doing?
It's great to be with you, man.
Thank you, man.
I've been enjoying the series for a while now as a viewer, and it's an honor to be here with you.
Oh, man. Well, we're glad to have you on. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? And like what we do here is we provide a platform for the jazz and music community to share their stories.
Yeah.
And we want to learn the story behind the story.
Yeah.
And I like to say we're promoting jazz through telling the story.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to get right into it. So my question is, who is Todd Marcus?
I am, as you shared, a bass clarinetist, composer. Mm-hmm. I'm up in Baltimore. I grew up in New Jersey originally, but I've been in Baltimore for 25 years, and that's a very important part of my identity at this point. I'm also very much involved in my community in Baltimore. Mm-hmm. It's called Sandtown, Winchester, the west side of Baltimore, very much along historical Pennsylvania Avenue, which was the Harlem of Baltimore. Wow. A lot of folks came to know our neighborhood in 2015 after the death of Freddie Gray, who was a resident of our community and died tragically. Yeah. So I'm someone that is passionate about music, kind of came later to music, later to jazz rather, and balanced that along with my community work, and then I'm also a sci-fi fan. So when I got some downtime, I'm checking out some Star Trek and all that good stuff. Man. Yeah,
I learned that you had played on my funk album,
right?
And that's when I learned that you were doing some other things in the community, man. And I really like impressed me.
Thank you.
So, man, thank you for that good work that you're doing.
Thank you.
And we just before we started this interview, we had a conversation about some things that go on in our community, and but it's good to know that there are people that really care, and you're one of those cats that genuinely care about people and the community.
Yeah.
And so, man, thank you for that.
Yeah, well, and likewise back to you, knowing your work many years as an educator. I think that's a bond that we share of, being passionate and fully serious about our music, but having these two full-time occupations, right? Yeah. And I feel that, to me, it's always been important that I love music deeply, but there's also, I feel like, a need, an obligation, a responsibility to be engaged in our world, our community, our society at some level, and people like you, like my wife, that are educators, that are working with our younger people, myself on the community level, dealing with poverty-related challenges in our neighborhood. Look, people that are out there focusing on environmental issues, on social justice issues, racial inequity issues, right? We got to be doing something. And as much as we love music, we can't. I feel like we have an obligation to do more within connection to our society, whatever that right balance is for each individual.
Yeah, it's funny because in different cultures and different, music is a functional aspect of society. Yeah. It's not just entertainment.
Right.
But over here we see music as entertainment. You dance, and so we do other things. We worship and we use it for different things. But yes, I agree, man. We have to begin using our gifts, whatever that music, whatever it is, to impact the world that we live. Yeah. So, yep. Now, what is your ethnic background? You mentioned, share with the audience. Yeah.
So I'm Egyptian American.
Okay.
My father was Egyptian. He passed about 5 years ago now. Okay. He grew up in a little town in Egypt called Minya. Most of our family is now based in Cairo.
Really?
But he was the eldest of 5 children.
Okay.
His dad was out of the picture fairly early because of alcohol, and so my dad, as the eldest of 5 kids, he was traveling down to Sudan, and he was working there, sending money back to the family.
Wow.
And then in his 20s, he immigrated to the U.S., met my mom. So she's from Pennsylvania.
Okay.
And so that's my ethnic background, and biracial. And for me as a person, growing up in New Jersey, we didn't have a big Middle Eastern community present, and there was no one at home that my dad could speak Arabic to.
Wow.
So I didn't grow up with learning the language.
Okay.
When I was in middle school, we started making trips back to Egypt to connect with family there. Yeah. But on a daily basis, it wasn't something that was available there for me. And so I think that it's been later on in life, the past 10 plus years, where we get older, and we were talking about some of these things beforehand. You're just like how we mature and want to know and learn more about ourselves and our culture and our history. And so I really work to explore the cultural side of my heritage, my ethnicity, by exploring Middle Eastern music.
Yeah, wow.
And I've done a lot of work to incorporate that into my music.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And that's beautiful, man. I've been to Egypt one time.
Was that with the Smithsonian?
Yeah, with the Smithsonian.
That's all you guys had. You were set up right in front of the pyramids.
Yeah, man. It was like, and I tell people, it was like, I remember seeing the pyramids like when it was like standing on the moon. Yeah. Like another planet.
Yeah.
And so, great experience, and I would advise anyone to they're able to go witness that wonder.
To be there, to see these things that are ancient, right? Yeah. And one of the things too is that you've got Cairo is this modern city of 20 plus million people, right up against the ancient, and so you've got places throughout the city from miles away where you're looking at the city, the buildings, everything, and then right behind there's the pyramids towering out behind. Yeah. So it's amazing. Awesome. I got pictures of my dad when he was younger.
Really?
On top of the pyramid, because you used to be able to climb it.
And they used to be able to climb up on the pyramid.
Oh yeah. Now they've made that illegal now, and now there are very rare occasions. I've seen some videos on YouTube where some folks got permits, from the Egyptian government to do that. But now you're not allowed to do that. The police would pull you down. But there's pictures of him on the top of one of the pyramids looking down over the Sphinx, which is like a quarter mile away.
Yeah. And so you still have family in
Yeah.
Are y'all close, or is it like?
Yeah, I've got some of my uncles that, because of the trips when we were young, that I got to know, and then a couple of my cousins that I'm close to. When we first made those trips, all the adults, because we were younger as kids, my brother and I, all the adults would come together and socialize, and then as kids, we went out and played in the streets.
Okay, wow.
And so I've got those 2 of my cousins that I had that time with that. There's a bond from that.
Okay. Did they ever come to the States?
One of them lives in Canada right now, and then the other is her husband works for one of the oil companies, and so they've been all around. Right now, she's in Holland.
Oh wow!
And she's probably the one that I'm closest to, and we keep in touch. But the last several years, it's been important for me to go back I had the chance to perform. That's been very
Yeah,
meaningful.
I read that. Yeah.
But then, of course, to reconnect with family.
Yeah.
And to do some of the sightseeing again that I did as a kid, but probably didn't fully appreciate when you were a kid. Some of the historical aspects.
No
and
doubt.
that's just, it's been really, really special. And it's led to new inspiration where, like, I got an album with my jazz orchestra coming out next year, and the music and the compositions are the inspiration of just these recent year trips and things that left me feeling and processing and putting into composition.
So, so let's go back. You say you where were you born in Pennsylvania or New Jersey?
In New Jersey.
You were born in what part?
Northern New Jersey, little town called Haworth. It's near Teaneck, which a lot of people know.
Yeah.
Right across the George Washington Bridge from New York City.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So
And a lot of the greats, like, of course, a lot of the greats lived in that area. You had Rudy Van Gelder Studios.
Wow.
You got
So you went
Monk's got all these tunes like Hackensack.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Wow. Little towns from all over that area.
Wow, that's cool, man.
I found out that Clark Terry lived in our town for a few years towards the latter part of his life. Yeah.
So did you get to hang in New York a lot coming up?
Well, that's part of the irony is that I was interested in jazz earlier on, but I turned away. And so it wasn't until later, after I had moved out of the area, that this access and passion started building. So all those years I was on the doorstep of all the source, and I didn't access it.
So what was it like? What was it like coming up as a kid, like in New Jersey? I mean, what was it like?
We lived in the suburbs outside of New York City, and so we played outside a lot. Playing basketball. My folks had in the yard. They put us in an area we called it the dirt area, where they set it aside, and my brother and I could go with shovels and dig in the dirt and build like little, because there were some logs and everything, build things. So I had this opportunity riding our bikes, where just doing a lot of creative stuff. Yeah, and. My dad, he was big on academics. He was a teacher. Yeah. And so that was top for him. And so, you had to get that stuff done. Yeah. And then you could go other things. Yeah. But yeah, I feel very blessed to have had a good childhood, a good safe place to grow up, and like when I look in contrast to some of the things we were talking about earlier, just the challenges a lot of our young people have. Yeah. I look at my neighborhood in Baltimore, and the challenges we were talking earlier. Yeah. Thursday night, the block next to mine, a 13-year-old girl was shot and killed. Wow. And you look at that reality. The boarded up vacant buildings, the poor school systems, the different challenges, the strain and the stress that the kids in my neighborhood now are dealing with versus what I was fortunate to have growing up. It's a night and day kind of thing. So I feel blessed for having that foundation, that kind of opportunity as a kid.
Doubt. And one thing, man, I've traveled to some places around the world, and I had to learn. I had to, as I got older, to appreciate the country we live in. Yeah. To appreciate freedom. A lot of times, and I hope our young people get to travel and see other places. See how, even what we call poor. Yeah. I've been some places. Yes. Like in Nigeria, Lagos. Right. And that. I mean, you be like, what? So our kids, maybe they need to travel.
I think you're absolutely right. And look, we know the reality. I'm sure this is stuff that you see too, where in my neighborhood, our kids don't have a scope of experience outside of the immediate community. Exactly. We're talking about things like where if you're saying, okay, well, we're going to go out to Chipotle, right, which is 2 miles away, and that's foreign, scary territory. Yeah, yeah. And so that's so true what you're talking about. Without that broader experience and awareness, it really puts people at a disadvantage. Yeah. Because
I was into music, I got to go into different communities. Yeah. And, I went across town. I grew up in West Philly. I went to South Philly. Yeah. Got on the bus, train to go take my music classes. Mm-hmm. And like some of our kids don't leave the hood. And I remember coming up in the hood thinking the hood was paradise. Yeah. I mean, but it was a different kind of hood when I came up.
Right.
But when I talk to young people that I teach, they love the hood with all that violence and with all, like I was saying, I had the kids out on reset, and you hear, brrr, we had to get all the kids in the building, but that's normal. That's become a norm. They hear these sounds, and it becomes normalized for them. This abnormality, and it's like, wow. So exposing them to how other people are living, that there's something bigger than the hood.
That's a great point. It makes me think about there's dual kind of importance of that exposure, is that it'll help to create that awareness that dynamic, that gunfire, that danger, that violence, that is not okay. That is not the norm, right?
Exactly.
And our kids need to know that.
Yeah.
They need, because it can't be normalized.
Yeah.
And it is.
Yeah.
And like you said, also to also get around to other places to understand, we're looking at some of our communities and looking at the poverty that is there. But you go out to some other places. I go out to visit smaller towns in Egypt or even in Cairo. You got folks that are living with nothing, man.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying.
So to contextualize, and as a country, we are so accustomed to so much, even in our poor communities.
Yeah.
And so just to put things in perspective, is like you said, there's a value, there's a relevance in that.
No doubt. And so now let's get back to the music. We can go deep into that. What did you come from a musical family?
Kind of. My mom, she played in church. She played piano.
Okay.
And so she would play organ at church sometimes, play piano. And so we would go to church. We had to sing in the choir. And then she was the one to make sure my brother and I had piano lessons. And then we got to pick a horn.
Okay.
And so that was something that I was fortunate for. Now, my dad, he didn't play an instrument, but he loved, interestingly, coming from Egypt, he loved classical music. So that was always on. That was always on in the house, yes. And so, that was the exposure. And then I really gravitated once I started playing clarinet in 4th grade.
So was clarinet your first instrument?
Well, piano first.
Okay, piano.
And then clarinet was my first horn, and I stuck with that.
Wow.
And that was the reality. My mom, she got inspired by seeing my brother and I progress with music, that she then in her 40s picked up the oboe.
Wow. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Wow. So now, is your mom still around?
She is.
Okay.
She is.
You said your dad passed?
My dad passed about 5 years ago,
Okay. Yeah. Wow. So he got to see some of your success and all that?
He did. He was he was a character. So, he did not like jazz. I told you he loved jazz music. And so he would never lose an opportunity to say, Todd, I don't like jazz. Like, okay, I get it. You don't have to say it every time.
Yeah. Wow,
But interestingly, towards the end, his last couple of years when I did some concerts and I was really working in the Middle Eastern influence, I think that kind of reached him in a certain way. And there were a couple times towards the end that he shared that he appreciated it a little bit. So
wow.
So that was
beautiful.
nice.
Beautiful. Yeah, man.
But that was him. My mom, on the other hand, I can't do any wrong, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh, Todd, that was amazing.
Wow, that's beautiful, man. Were you and your brother close?
We were early years. We haven't been in adulthood. We're very different, and I think that's been tougher.
Yeah.
But he similarly, he has continued. He did not like playing the saxophone. He found his passion was guitar.
Okay.
And so he plays guitar, and he's kind of like rock jam band kind of style. Very passionate about that.
Yeah. So was music, when you started playing, was it, this is what I want to do? Or was it you did doing it because it's fun and my parents, got us.
Yeah, that's a good question. I remember when you say, was it fun? I remember one time in high school, the band director, because we would go each year, we would take a band trip. Mm-hmm. We went in the wintertime, we would do fundraisers. We'd go door to door selling oranges and grapefruits to raise money for the band trip.
Okay.
And then we would get to travel different places, and that was wonderful. But I remember him at one point saying, okay, I think he must have been dissatisfied with us and like our attitude or the way we were playing. And he said, aren't you guys having fun? And I remember, I was one of the top players in the band. I'm like, well, I mean, fun. I mean, going to Six Flags is fun.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. Like now, of course, yes, it's joy and fun. But back then, I think I enjoyed doing it. I think I excelled at it. But no, I didn't see like that. I want to be a musician. And I remember actually coming out of high school and figuring like, well, what is going to be next? And when the idea of going to music school, I was like, nah, I don't think that's the path. So I didn't see that being like the next step for me as a professional musician.
That's heavy. So did music came easy to you?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think that I was good at it. I think that when we would have the all county and all state competitions, I was extra motivated, and that kind of competitive spirit kicked in.
Yeah.
But I think I had a natural inclination, and so it didn't come. I'm not saying that I was natural at it, but I think that there was something there. And then certainly once I started getting the opportunity to be exposed to jazz and really getting my feet wet in that, and then that would just open up this passion and that self-learning, and I'm self-taught, and so just I run with it from there.
So did you study? Did you take private lessons, or did you?
When I was a kid, I would have private lessons. It would be for a lot of the classical repertoire, because for clarinet.
Yeah.
See, it's a different experience than saxophone, and even just to like the great clarinetist Don Byron, who was so important for me as someone to see. Here's an example of someone that's doing modern jazz on clarinet. But we've taught, and we've got to know each other over the years and worked together, and we've talked about just the dynamic that as a clarinetist. You're not really shown that, clarinet can, just like any other instrument, be in jazz. And
it's a hard instrument.
It's a hard instrument, and just like a lot of the repertoire is very much focused on that classical kind of material.
Yeah.
And so, that was what was available to me. And even in high school, when I expressed interest in jazz, I remember the band director said, no, to do that, you have to play saxophone. And didn't say, well, it's easy to double on the saxophone and whatnot. So I was kind of turn away from that inquiry.
So did you and I know you said your dad had standards.
Yeah.
So do you think that played into, that carried over into the music?
I think so.
I have to, whatever I do, it has to be on a high step.
I think so, definitely. And I tell you an example that makes me, I always remember about that. So as I told you, he was a teacher.
Yeah.
And every night, after dinner, he would check our homework.
Wow.
And so, like the math, you would get your math assignment, and he would go through it, and he would say, okay, you had 25 math problems you had to do. There are 3 errors. And he wouldn't tell you which ones were the ones.
Wow.
So you have to go back to that dining room table, sit there, and basically redo the whole assignment.
Wow.
And then at a certain point, I'm like, man, this is taking forever, man. So he would be looking over it, and I would go behind his chair and try to see, because he would write on the paper which ones, and I think that he got hip to that. So then he started writing which one was the error. He started writing it in Arabic.
Wow.
So to come back to your question, that notion of a diligence, of a perfection, do it right, figure it out.
Yeah.
That was training in those formative years that I think definitely carried over into music and everything for me.
I remember I had an elementary student who was his parents. He was from Iran or Iraq, and this kid was interested in everything, whether it was music. He wanted to know. Like right now, kids be like, I ain't into music. They might. In their regular classroom, they may listen and pay attention. They get to music, they think it's playtime. But no, this kid, every subject, he had that level of, wanting to learn, wanting to know, and knowing it. And I think that was instilled from his parents.
Yeah.
And so that's why I asked you that. But that's And so you were always the first chair clarinetist? Or the top clarinetist?
In high school, and then when we would have those all-state competitions, I would place pretty highly in that stuff, and I had some wonderful experiences. I mean, that was really my first memories of a joy and a reverence for music. Being around other, the other top
the other
students
top,
in the area and playing music, and playing at a high level and just feeling that kind of amazing feeling like this, this reverence, like oh my God, this is transcendent.
Yeah. And they have those in different cities, I guess, because I was in the all city band, and all the Christian McBride and Joey, Joey, and other musicians, Tony Hurdle, and all these cats that were just like, they took music serious,
right?
And to be around that, it just I got to raise my game.
Yeah, and that's where I think that competitive aspect can be a positive thing, because look. In music, like in sports, competition, is the difference between win or loss.
Yeah.
In music, obviously, it's a different dynamic, because we're about coming together collectively, making something beautiful together. So it's not the same competition kind of dynamic, but it is relevant in that when I go hear you play. I'm like, oh man, this cat is throwing down, right? And so I both appreciate it and savor it, but then it's also that competitive aspect where, and then it's like, man, I need to get myself together, right?
No doubt.
And then go home, and it drives me to be working harder and to
it's
try
funny
to be stronger.
I was listening to you saying the same thing. I said, this cat is playing this thing, and so it's because we all want to find our best self.
Yeah.
And they say one fire lights another fire.
Yeah.
So I understand.
And so being around
other
amazing musicians, it raises us all together because it drives us.
Like living in Baltimore, because Baltimore has some of I don't know, man. Baltimore, it's something in the water, man. I'm talking about Antonio Hart, Mark Gross, Gary Boy. I mean, you can just run them off, it's just they produce some great musicians. Warren Wolf,
Gary Thomas.
Yeah, Gary. It's like, man, it's Brent
Burkhead.
Oh my God, man, it's something in the water, man.
Yeah.
And but and I used to play in Baltimore a lot with Dante Winslow, who's another Baltimore. In the early '90s, I used to go down there and play, and man. Baltimore reminded me of Philly.
Right. Right.
Because you had an audience that really was into the music, and I just got, and that's the feeling I felt when I was coming up in Philly.
Yeah.
So man, something in the water, man. So.
Yeah, all those guys, Eric Kennedy, Lee Pearson.
Oh man, you can rattle them off.
Yeah.
And then you can go into, Dan Atwater. And you can go into the gospel. I mean, that's it. It's like Baltimore got something in the water.
And there's something. It's got a lot of the musicians have had a real unique sound, given kind of identity. And I've heard people, be up in New York and talking about it's like you just said, it's something in the water in Baltimore. It's
man,
kind of a little bit different vibe.
And I like I like there's a camaraderie. He's my. Sometimes I read Warren Wolf's post, and he's really proud. He's really happy for his city and the cast they're playing from his city, man. So that's a good thing, man. Beautiful thing.
It is, and I feel like right now here in 2021, the scene in Baltimore is the strongest it has been in many years.
Wow.
Just with the number of players, and even the scene. I remember when I was getting into the music, the late 90s and early 2000s, the kind of deal was if you would go and see what was happening at the New Haven Lounge on Friday and Saturday, and if there wasn't something happening there, maybe you had something happen at Caton Castle. Otherwise, you had to get in the car and come down to D.C.
Yeah.
And now we've got a pretty healthy scene with Andi Musique, which has kept the music going. Caton Castle's been on hold during the pandemic, but still present. The addition of Keystone Corner, Creative Alliance sometimes does music. Yeah. So you got some venues that make a healthy scene where I admit I come down to DC less because I've got all these options as a listener and a fan. Plus the number of musicians. Sean Jones moved to the area recently. You know, Brent Burkhead has come back. As you mentioned, Warren has been back in town.
Cyrus Chestnut's from Baltimore.
Cyrus Chestnut's from Baltimore and is in the area. Plays often.
And he's at
Tim Green. You know,
Tim Green. Dang.
Richard Kirk. You know,
just those.
Yeah.
Beautiful, man. That means I need to get down to Baltimore
man.
and get some of that fire. So yeah, man, that's beautiful, man. I wonder, do you have perfect pitch?
No, I don't.
You don't? Okay. You have.
I hope you don't think less of me for it.
No, man. Because when I was checking your music, I said, Miss Cat is here, and we're gonna talk about your playing, man, which I really admire. But man, I like to ask people that.
Yeah.
I think it's like an unfair advantage.
Yeah. When I hear, and I've watched in some of the interviews where you ask people that, and when I hear people talk about how they're able to use it, I think, boy, that would be a beautiful thing to have. But no, it's
it's funny. I remember I was teaching, and I found a second grader. I discovered it for him.
Oh.
Named Timothy Wiggins. He didn't know it was mildly autistic, but I discovered it for him, and he was rattling notes off like. When once I associated the sound with a note, C sharp, E, and it just blew my mind, man. I'm like, how you do that? Mm-hmm. So man, I'm fascinated with that.
Yeah.
Let's go now. Let's talk about how you got exposed to jazz. You said you got exposed to jazz later in life.
Yeah. So during high school, while I was turned away by the band director, I actually had an English teacher, and it turned out that during summers, he would go down to New Orleans and hang out at Preservation Hall with all the old original guys. And he did this, I think maybe starting like the 60s and 70s. So he had access to some of those original musicians before they passed. And I got to be around him, and he would give me music to listen to. But it wasn't until I got to college, I came down to Baltimore and I went to Loyola for a couple of years.
Is that how you got to?
That's how I ended up in Maryland.
Okay.
And there was a music department, a small music department, and the director would let anybody play. Like there was a big band, and as opposed to high school where I was turned away because I was a clarinet, anybody could participate. And so that was an introduction to a lot of like the modern jazz stuff, like whether it was. Big band like Count Basie, Duke Ellington charts, or arrangements of things like Green Dolphin Street, the standards. So that was a real kind of access point for me. And then there was a kid that I met, a fellow student in that, and he started giving me records to listen to. And so then I started falling in love with Oscar Peterson and Stan Getz, and then eventually make my way to Bird and to Coltrane and Miles Davis. And so that was in that time period when it just all started going into exploration and fall in love deep with the music.
So did you eventually go to college for music, or do you?
No, I was going for political science.
Oh wow!
And my dad I mentioned was a teacher, and he was a history and world cultures teacher.
Gotcha.
And so he always had documentaries on at home, and to me that was fascinating, and history, and so
Beautiful.
Learning different aspects, political, whether it's Vietnam crisis or Watergate. These I remember Middle East, all these kind of things, things that we're studying. But then in all my free time, I was going over to the music department and starting to practice.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's funny. So I've never been a drinker. And in high school, I played basketball. And then when I got to college, the weekends come around, and I find I'm the only one left in the dorm because everybody else went out drinking and partying. And so suddenly I had this kind of gap, this void. And it was good for me that music, jazz came at that time because now I had all these hours.
Wow.
And so I started going to the practice room, and I started listening to music.
Did you start hanging out, going to clubs, jazz clubs, and all that sort of thing?
A little bit. There was another student at the school, and we check out a couple things, and so that began that process a little bit.
So was there a point? Now, were you fully vested like said, I'm gonna do this jazz thing, or was it just something that I enjoyed, But if I get a gig here, a gig there, here, a gig there, a gig.
At that point, gigs were still many years away.
Oh, wow.
I mean, Antonio, when I tell you that, I couldn't play jazz, I mean, if I put on some of that stuff, those early things, you'd be like, oh my God.
Wow.
And so it was a lot of years. Even like when I met my wife in 2001, and she talks about how people would say, "Oh, yeah, your boyfriend's a musician." It's like, where does he play? And she'd say, he doesn't play, he just practices.
He said he just practices.
Yeah, because I was trying to figure it out. Again, I wasn't in music school, so I was self-taught.
Wow.
I was listening to the records and figuring it out. And so it was a while. It was in my kind of early 20s before I started going to some jam sessions, and then later on even had a gig.
And man, I hope people hear this. That lets you know that you can start. It doesn't matter if you get a late start, but if you have the desire and you want to put that work in, because like the things you've accomplished since then is amazing. You know what I'm saying? We're gonna get into some of that, but that's good. I mean, that's like wow. You found it because some people don't find their thing until later on in life. I knew I wanted to do this since 10. Yeah. So that's good, man. So when you
and you're right because there's such a pressure or expectation to be amazing at a young age. But I think the takeaway is, like you said, that if you put the time in, even if it wasn't something you were doing earlier on and more naturally soaked up, even as an adult, I told you my mom picked up the oboe at age 42.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
And she's pecked away at it, and she got good. And
Wow.
then she plays in like community orchestras and,
Really?
and whatnot.
Wow.
And so, yeah, you and I are professional musicians. We love playing. We do it at a high level. But this is something, a joy in music that, you can do even if you're not like Christian McBride, right?
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah.
So
Yeah. So when you you wasn't playing the bass clarinet this time?
Right. I was just playing clarinet at that point.
Okay.
And I got to a point where, as I was starting to get more and more into it and getting to play with that college big band and everything, I felt like that I was doing solo-wise, when my solo opportunity come around, I sounded like a bad Dixieland player. And so a friend that was giving me records gave me, for a birthday present, Eric Dolphy's Outward Bound album.
Wow, I got that.
And I heard Eric Dolphy, the great saxophonist, flautist, and bass clarinetist. And I said, oh man, this bass clarinet's got something different going on.
Wow.
There's so much more possibilities. And that was when I started my quest to get a bass clarinet.
Wow.
And that was 1997 that I got my bass clarinet.
Wow.
And started cultivating a path on that horn.
Wow.
Yeah.
Man, that's something, man. Now, how did you enjoy, like when you start playing bass clarinet, was it how similar or different was it to the B flat?
Well, the fingerings are all the same. You've got an extra low note, or depending, there's a couple different bass clarinets that go even low. There's one that goes even lower, but fingering is basically the same. The big adjustment is the amount of air that you need, so much more air to fill that thing up.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm sure like it would maybe the equivalent
like
of you
a
playing
baritone.
of alto versus baritone.
Yeah, yeah.
So that was like going into like doing long tones, extensively to start off, build up that wind support.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, now did you have, so Eric Dolphy, was that your biggest influence initially? Who was some of your influences in terms of jazz that really you were checking out?
I'd say the early ones from back in high school with some of the recordings that music teacher, Mark Wright, gave me to listen to.
Okay.
Clarinet player like George Lewis, one of the old New Orleans style ones, Benny Carter. But then when I started getting into modern jazz, Oscar Peterson, Stan Getz, Clark Terry, then Coltrane, Miles, Mingus, and then Dolphy. I got my hands on every Dolphy album, but I would never say that I sound like Dolphy or try to go down that path, because he is such a other world, that I think that I was going for more of a mainstream kind of style, looking at saxophone players and piano players, McCoy Tyner, Chick Corea, Coltrane, that kind of style of playing. Whereas Dolphy was just like this whole other, much freer kind of spirit and style.
So is there any other bass clarinet players that really?
That's where Don Byron was key for me.
Okay.
And I think it was maybe 96 or so. The girl I was dating, she gave me an article she cut out of a magazine.
Oh, wow.
It was on Don Byron, and so I started exploring. I said, okay, here's a clarinet player that's doing this instrument in a straight-ahead, modern jazz kind of context.
Okay.
And so Don plays clarinet and bass clarinet. And so that was really critical for me as far as seeing, okay, it is possible. Because for a while I questioned it, because I felt that the bass clarinet might be limited towards a certain range. When it gets faster and when it gets louder, it's very hard to hear yourself as a bass clarinet player.
Man, I was going to ask you. I got these questions that I was going to ask you. First thing when I hear the bass clarinet, it sounds like as if it has 3 ranges.
Yeah.
You got the basement,
right?
And that basement has a personality. Then it got that middle range, with and then that has its own personality. Then it has that upper range,
right?
That has another personality. Am I correct in that assessment?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So were you able to master all these? That's a pretty broad range.
Yeah, it is.
And
that's one of the unique things about the instrument, and that's normally it gets used in jazz like it's a double, right? In the slower sections or textural kind of context. And even I was talking about with Dolphy, because I wanted to be featuring all the different aspects, the range of the instrument, but I wanted to be able to play it not just in slower and medium settings, but up tempo. And I noticed with Dolphy, because I started running up against the wall of being able to hear myself. It's the tone of the horn. It's a rounder versus a saxophone, so it's harder to latch in when things get kind of hot and heavy, right? When it's higher tempo, and so be able to hear yourself and lock in. And so I noticed with Dolphy that when it got to those settings, he would switch to his alto. And so for a long time I said, okay, history is telling me that it can't be done. And so at that point I bought a saxophone, and I tried a little while. And it just never took. So I put that saxophone back in the closet, and I kept working until I broke through that barrier on bass clarinet. And so I feel like this is an area where I've charted some new ground.
Yeah.
Because if you look, most bass clarinet players, they can't step into that aspect, that territory.
Yeah, you done figured it out.
I figured it out.
And I'm listening to you, man, and I hear Wayne Short, I hear Tim Warfield, I hear Gary Thomas.
Yeah.
I hear Wayne Short. I mean, you was. I said, man, you done figured it out.
Yeah, thank you.
I was going to, but I did write. Does the sound ever get lost? Like, with a saxophone, the bell is closer to the ears. At least with the alto. But then with the bass clarinet, the bell is like all the way down to the floor. Is there a sweet spot that you got to find where you can actually tune out all the other instruments, or is it a psychological thing?
That's a great point. I had never thought about that aspect of the bell being farther away and that being a factor in the challenge of hearing yourself. That's interesting. that's really that, and that would make some sense. I'd say that, with clarinet, the sound kind of distribution points come in the middle of the horn and at the bell. And so, like, if you get a microphone for bass clarinet, they recommend 2, one on the bell, one on the middle of the horn. And the same with clarinet. Yeah. So, whereas saxophone, you just put it on the bell. So I think that's part of the challenge, like I was saying, that you get into it when things are really getting thick, and you can easily lose yourself. For me, I had to do a lot of work, again, charting new territory, experimenting with mouthpieces, because there's limited options about what is offered. I found this mouthpiece maker named Bill Street up in Maine. His son is the great bassist Ben Street, and he kept making more and more open because I was blowing so hard into the instrument in order to be heard.
Yeah.
And then I experimented. I said, okay, let me try a baffle, because I was really falling in love with the music of Gary Thomas, and I saw that Gary Thomas had this Strathon mouthpiece. It had an adjustable baffle.
Yeah.
So I experimented with that, and then I built my own baffle. I went to Home Depot. First, I got some clay. I experimented with a different shape, and then I took the clay out, had made the markings, and I took the epoxy from Home Depot. You know, you open up the different sides, mix it together, and then I put it in there, shape it, and it gets a chemical reaction, and it hardens, and that was how I created my own unique mouthpiece.
That's beautiful. Yeah. So you ever think about having, now, is it a brand?
So interestingly, this past year, I've been going back and forth with the company Sios, that does the 3D printing of mouthpieces. And I said, okay, well, this is interesting. You know, let's see if what they can come up with. And so they've been working with creating a specific signature mouthpiece. It'll be the Todd Marcus mouthpiece.
Beautiful,
It'll be
man.
coming
That's
out I think this fall. Yeah, and it's got those qualities: the big baffle and the open mouthpiece. Yeah, so it's because it's something that I've charted. I've done this work to find out how you can make it possible to be heard better in this setting.
Wow, that's beautiful. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
And you know, like, because I would think, like when you go to a jam session, you might have one mic. You know, is there a certain place that you got to position it?
If you just have one, then I'm putting it on the bell.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And even with my clarinet, interestingly, most clarinetists you'll see they'll put it on the middle of it. And I've had times where, like when we play at Keystone Corner with, I'm part of this great group called the Baltimore Jazz Collective that Sean Jones started, and so I've had times there where they want to put the mic on the middle, which is the typical thing. But when things get really loud on the bandstand, it still finds that your best bet to get that to pick up is on the bell.
Okay. Now, what about when there's no microphone?
And that's been my reality so much of the time, and that's what's, I think, driven me to push hard and to try to get this maximum volume and projection with this mouthpiece stuff, with the different reed options. Because I think a lot of other folks that are still having the luxury of having a mic all the time, they haven't had to fight through that sonic challenge as much.
And we're going to talk about your bands, but that's the beautiful thing about having a band, is that you can discuss, as opposed to a jam session when you playing with cats, everybody's hitting.
Yeah.
You know, with a band, you can talk about dynamics.
Right.
You know, the ebb and flow, whatever. Now, is that something you have to convey as?
I just work through it, because if you know, so often Eric Kennedy plays drums with me, and Eric Kennedy is one of the most dynamic drummers out there, because Eric loves the quietest of pianissimo, and then he roars, and so, you know, if you want to hang in there with Eric Kennedy, you're gonna have to be able to bring it, volume wise, and so that's just been reality. Whether it's a jam session or even my own bands, I know that I need to have that power and that projection to hang in there. And just also to what you were saying, like the style of what I like to play, it's intense stuff. You mentioned Gary Thomas, Tim Warfield. You know, those are a couple of tenor saxophone players that had a big influence on Gary Bartz. You know, guys that dig in and have a context very thick and intense.
Yeah, no doubt.
And so, I could just keep it like, oh, everybody play quiet. But that's not what I'm going for with the music. I want some power, some powerful stuff, some emotional things happening.
And you're doing it, man. And we're going to talk about that. You've achieved that. You know what I'm saying? And I remember years ago hearing you at, I don't know if it was a jam session or wherever, man, but I heard it. I could hear it then, but you actually perfected it.
So I feel like I've done that. I've completed that mission.
But I'm interested in, how did you develop your improvisational concept? Okay, you're pretty much self-taught in terms of improvisation, jazz improvisation. What was your methodology?
Listening to records.
Did you do a lot of transcribing?
A little bit, a fair amount. Not as much as a lot of our colleagues, and but tons of listening and. some transcribing. And it was really a slow process. I have a friend that asked me the other day about some of this stuff and whether I feel that being self-taught is an asset or versus, having teacher. And I definitely think that had I been in music school or had some private lessons, jazz lessons, I think it would have accelerated the process, definitely.
Really?
Because I look at some of the things that, just going at it alone, it was self-learning, it was tough and everything, and slower. But it is what it is, and I think it leads me to who I am as a player now.
Yeah. Well, now let me give you the flip side.
Okay.
Because I'm formal. Okay. I think sometimes the formal thing gets in the way. Because they come with all these rules. Oh, you don't play it like that.
Yeah.
That's, like Tim Warford plays double lip armature.
Okay.
Branford, and I tried it because I like the, I like the sound of but most teachers would tell you that's the wrong way to play. If I do believe in self-discovery or discovery.
Yeah.
And in a way, I did. Everything wasn't taught to me because this whole thing is your own experience. I wished I would have learned jazz by ear as opposed to somebody telling me, okay, on this chord, you put this.
Right.
And I was reading with Roy Hargrove, who's like, who was one of the baddest, most soulful cats, man. He was able to play by ear, and Gary Bartz talks about that, being able to play by ear. So do you play by ear, or are you in your mind saying, okay, I'm gonna put this bebop scale over this, and
for me, definitely, I'm thinking about a lot of stuff that I want to do.
Okay.
And I think that some of those, like what we were talking about, Gary Thomas as an inspiration, and that's such a unique style, right? And that's it's very warm and organic, but it's also very cerebral. Yeah. And that was I think he's been an influence on a lot of us in Baltimore. And that's not something you're just going to hear.
Well,
that is some heavily worked out stuff.
Gary Thomas influenced Tim Warfield.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Gary Thomas influenced a whole lot of people. But if you listen to him or McCoy Tyner or Chick Corea, these are all folks that were just really inspirations to me. And they have these very beautiful harmonic systems worked out. And that inspired me and to a lot of the stuff that I tried to emulate or then cultivate. And for me also working with Middle Eastern influences, it's been a lot of like working that stuff out and having to be thinking like, if I'm using some of this Middle Eastern stuff, I need to know where I am within the chord and which of these Middle Eastern scales I'm going to apply. And so that's not something you're just going to necessarily hear by ear. Now there's some folks, if you grew up with it and just organically heard that, then maybe that'll work. But for me, it's been, it's oftentimes it's calculated about how to construct it. And I think, back to Gary Bartz, I remember one time he had an interview and they said, well, you're improvising. He said, no, I'm not improvising because this didn't just happen on a whim. Yeah. He said, I've spent years studying this and coming up with this content that I'm arranging in the moment. And I see it a little bit more like that. Yes, there's an improvisation in the moment where you responding what's happening with the band, but a lot of that content we spend years building that up, the vocabulary, and then knowing how to apply it. And look, the more we can get away with the thinking part, the better. Yeah. But there's a lot of thought in the moment for me.
No doubt. I'm just talking. I would like to be, and this is something that I want to work on. Walk in on a song like Dolores, and just be able to just get in there and play off of the sonic whatever's going on. I didn't work. I know how to create melodically on my instrument and all that, but I don't want to be bound by thinking in those chords. I want to be able to just develop that ability. Because if I know the changes, I'm good. Yeah. But if I don't know the changes, I'm handicapped. Yeah. So I want to be able to get over that handicap.
I feel the same way, and I feel like that comes back to what we were talking about perfect pitch, right? Because maybe that's something that we envy about folks with perfect pitch because are they more empowered than they're like, I'll walk in, I don't know this tune, and just nail it.
But think about this: a vocalist that's scatting? Are they thinking about, okay, B flat 7 going flat 9, or they just boobity boobity,
Right.
you know, and something tells me they're just following their ear.
And I think that that's very true. And I feel for myself, and maybe it's what you're saying, the same thing, is that maybe we need to force ourselves sometimes not to be thinking about all this content that we've worked on, that we're so eager to apply.
Yeah.
But, to step back and just think of it more like a vocalist, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes I try to do that. Like if I'm in the car driving, I try to sing solos to be more like the piano player that while they're playing the lines, they're singing it too.
Yeah.
So to be more organic about it.
Yeah, yeah. And that comes with the two hemispheres of the brain, the right and left, the abstract and the concrete, and putting them. And I think Train was able to get to that.
Yeah.
He was able to and then he figured stuff out, of course. Yeah. But he was able to kind of have that balance of these both sides, the abstract and the concrete and all that. So, but yeah, that's something to think about.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, man, let's talk about you as a thing I want to add. Do you have a musical philosophy?
I don't know. What would be an example of that?
A music philosophy could be, like Bird said, you got to live the music. Like it could be your standard. People got different, philosophy. What do you attribute to your success? And I guess because you may not have formally created a philosophy, but there's something that was intrinsic that pushed you to, because nobody made you do all this stuff. It was something you gotta love. Your philosophy, like, you gotta love it. You gotta want it.
Yeah.
It could be anything. It could be, sometimes we don't think about this stuff, but when I go back and think, when I tell people, I just follow what was in my heart.
Yeah.
I want it. You gotta want it. I don't know how to like when I first heard Charlie Parker, nobody had to sell Charlie Parker to me. I felt it and heard it as a 12-year-old. It wasn't nothing you got to explain. Okay, well, you got to go through this to get to the show. No, he knocked me out. So jazz, I loved it when I first heard it. It was like, wow.
Yeah.
The kids that I teach can't hear it.
Yeah.
So, but I do tell people, I had a dream at an early age I wanted to do something. And everything in my life was based on that desire to go after that desire to be a good musician, great musician. I didn't know where it would lead, but it was like it guided me, And so I tell people to have a dream. And I don't know if that's a philosophy or not, but to have something that compels you where no one has to tell you to practice. Nobody has to tell you, it has to something intrinsic, So I don't know. But you had to have something that propelled you from, at a late age, hearing jazz, to put that work in to the point where now you are carving out your own mouthpieces and
doing the MacGyver, yeah. Well, I think that similar thing of I fell in love with it, and interestingly, I remember there were a couple points earlier on where I must have been exposed and it captured me, and I think maybe I might have heard something even earlier as on Sesame Street as a kid. I remember as a young kid, I was interested. I wanted to go to a jazz concert. My mom was going to take me. I would get these headaches, and so the time we had to go, and then we couldn't go because I was sick with the headache. So I know there were different points where I was interested, and finally when I got that exposure, I ran with it. So I think the philosophy, kind of what you were sharing, I would say is that if you find that you fall in love with something and then do the work to explore it. In our case, obviously it's music. That the capacity for self-learning, for the human brain to learn is fascinating, and and boundless, and
Yeah.
I feel like I'm an example of that. You know, I started just a little bit at a time, or very, very much at a time, working hard on it, and you can see that progress. I'm not a piano player by any means, but when I was trying to learn theory and harmony, it was sitting down at the piano, 1, 3, 5, 7, right?
Yeah.
And then listening, and then I can, you put a lead sheet in front of me, and I can play it.
Yeah.
With
Wow.
some
Yeah.
halfway decent
Yeah.
voices. And I always felt like, oh man, look, I didn't, as a younger kid, have piano, jazz, piano lessons, whatever, but look what, by working on it consistently, we can develop.
And you develop a mindset that anything I put my mind to, I can achieve.
Yeah, and I think that that's probably the case with music or in science or,
Yeah.
whatever kind of discipline.
Yeah.
And now, look, not everybody is going to be Charlie Parker,
No doubt.
but it's a beautiful thing to see what we can accomplish and how we can
Human
grow.
potential.
And maybe, and I think that's the thing. Look, we have this standard that we hold ourselves to, where we want to be the greatest in everything, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And we know most of us will not reach
Yeah,
that, right?
yeah.
But I think that if we can see that we're always making small incremental steps in progress, we got to be satisfied with that. Because if we're continuing to work and continuing to make that progress, that's what we should celebrate.
And that's why I think it's important to share these stories, because we live in what we call the microwave generation, where everybody wants it right now.
Right.
They don't want to work for nothing. They want to be start at the top.
Yeah.
But the idea that you can actually grow at something, you can actually evolve if you put your mind to it and willing to put that work.
Yeah.
So good, man.
Yeah.
I'd wanted to ask you, did you make a conscious choice to say, I want to represent the bass clarinet as a solo instrument?
Oh yeah.
You
yeah.
made
Yeah. I think once I realized, I mean, I felt always. I think as a clarinetist, we always have a chip on our shoulder.
Okay.
Because clarinet has been relegated to the sidelines in jazz,
Yeah.
right? In modern jazz. Or if it's used, it's certainly bass clarinet. It has a real presence in avant-garde and freer styles. And some of that, I think, comes from Eric Dolphy and that freeness in his playing. Now, look, he was playing with the straight-ahead guys, with Mingus, with Coltrane. But his stylistic thing was such that I think there's a whole thread of a branch of the tree, of the jazz tree that stems from that. So yeah, I think for me, wanting to show that it was possible to take this instrument and use it in a straight-ahead context was very important. And I feel a lot of pride in that. And it's been rewarding too. I really work to try to be aware of and connect with other people that are on my instrument, whether it's reaching out to elders like Don Byron I talked about. I brought Benny Maupin into Baltimore about 10 years ago.
Wow.
Because here's a guy that's so significant in that lineage, right?
Yeah.
From his work with Miles Davis, with Herbie Hancock on the bass clarinet. And now that I'm getting older, wanting to be aware of who are the other players that are coming up. And there's more and more amazing players that are doing it in a straight-ahead context. And there's a community within that, and I feel like I've always wanted to embrace that and support that and have that camaraderie, because there's so few of us.
Marcus
Miller?
Miller. Yeah. I don't know if he does it but he's
wonderful player.
Yeah. He's,
now he'll bring it out more like in the ballet, like When I Fall in Love. But yeah, he can play. Yeah.
Oh man, let's talk about you as a band leader. What are the qualities of effective leadership? Because it's not when you have these different aggregations of musicians, and you're dealing with people.
Yeah.
And you're trying to get them to support your vision.
Yeah.
So, what would you think are some of the qualities of effective leadership?
I think being clear, being honest, being upfront with people, and how you communicate with them. That's very important. It brings order. To a situation, right? If there's order and things are laid out, that's a first step that's important. When you get an email from the band leader and it's like half the details aren't missing, or as musicians, they don't mention what the money is for the game. We're talking about chaos from the beginning, so, and things don't thrive from chaos. So having stuff together, having the charts clear in this day and age where the older tradition of like touring bands is fewer and farther in between. Having the stuff together so that you have your charts, right? You can email the charts and maybe some audio samples so musicians can learn the music in advance.
So being organized.
Being organized, yeah. Again, clear, organized. That's all important. And then, for me as a band leader and as a composer, I write music that, it is storytelling. And I think that is interesting or strives to be interesting and engaging for all the different musicians. And I think that helps as a band leader, make music that people want to play.
So were you a born leader, or did you have to learn some of these things? Like, or these some things you...
Maybe a little of a mix.
Okay.
Maybe a little mix. I think that I've come to see that I've been in different leadership roles, whether it's music, as a bass clarinetist, there's not the volume of calls for work that you have as a saxophone player. And so by default, you have to be a leader. Because otherwise, most of the time, you're not working.
Yeah, no doubt.
And maybe it's an opportunity for me to say thank you to the times you call me to be part of your project, because that's very, very, very rare and far between. But even, music stuff, in my community work, I'm a more kind of sit back and watch and observe and quieter, and I think about stuff before I act, and I think that that's my style, and that has been part of my leadership at my community work at Intersection of Change, my nonprofit. So I think that I've been a leader by necessity in a lot of cases.
Okay. Now, you've led a variety of different musical configurations.
Yeah.
Quartet/quintet, trio, duo, to a no-net.
Yeah.
No-net. Is that how it's spelled?
No-net, non-net, yeah.
Non-net, okay.
And that's why I ended up calling it the jazz orchestra, because I realized, we're in a day and age where people might not know what a quartet is. Or I'm worried that they're going to know what a non-net is, so that's why I went with jazz orchestra.
What inspired you to create these different configurations?
I was influenced and inspired when I was falling in love with the music. I was still at Loyola, and we would, this friend of mine and I, we would go to hear the music in Baltimore. We would make trips up to New York, and one of the ensembles we heard was the Jason Lindner Big Band at Smalls, and they had a Monday residency. And that was a big band that I loved because it was the big band, but it had more of a modern kind of context. And it was around that time that Joe Henderson's big band CD came out too. Same kind of thing, traditional big band, but modern. Joe's modern kind of music, and that really, that just appealed to me. I mean, it's the beauty of all this thick sound and the arranging you can do, the storytelling you can do. Yeah. But then breaking down to a solo section where you're still going on a journey, not just like a chorus kind of thing, like often happens in the older big band style, right? But digging in on the solo front and take a long storytelling solo too. So those were things that were influences, and I remember I started, some of my first efforts at ensembles was with the nine-piece group. Oh, wow. And it started as a co-led project with myself and Lyle Link.
Wow.
Because we both
another wonderful saxophone musician who moved back to the area.
Moved back from the area, recently moved back. And we co-led that for a little while, and then I kept doing more writing, and I think Lyle was stepping back a little bit. But we did that for years together as part of the ensemble. And that was really, like I said, something that I liked because of the opportunity to really tell a story. And if you have a fast tune, for example, to set it up with a slow introduction, and then you build and then go into the faster part. Wow. And I feel like we talk about oftentimes the dynamic of trying to get people into our music as listeners and to appreciate it. And I think that sometimes it's easier for an uninitiated listener to hear the larger ensemble and to respond to that arrangement,
Yeah.
that storytelling aspect,
Yeah.
than a smaller group where we play a shorter melody
Yeah.
and then go into the
Yeah.
solos.
Yeah.
And the soloing
Yeah.
part sometimes they get lost in.
And we're gonna talk about your compositions because that has that's quality of that story.
Yeah, yeah.
But so you're the Todd Marcus Jazz Orchestra.
Yeah.
What does that comprise? How many instruments is that?
So it's
comprise?
6 horns,
Okay.
piano, bass, and drums.
Okay. And sometimes you use a vocalist.
I've had a few tunes, a
Yeah,
few tunes that
okay.
have folded in the vocalist as well.
So, but you also have a duo and then trio. With is that by the gig only get paid this much?
Some of it. Yeah, I mean, you know the deal. I mean, sometimes the finances are such that you need to pare down the size. But then I've also written music for each of those configurations.
Which is, man, I heard you. I was listening to something, man, and you were playing a trio, and man, you didn't even miss the piano.
Yeah,
nice. It was like and. Is it easier to play without piano, or do you think it's more challenging?
I love both.
Okay.
I love both. The last record that I did was a trio record that featured Ralph Peterson.
Yeah.
And
at Blue House, right?
At Blue House, yeah. And so that features music that I wrote for that setting. And I like, my playing, I like to have a very thick kind of harmonic approach.
Yeah.
So I've got plenty that I like to work in there. With Ralph as drums, you work with Ralph, and he's gonna fill up the space.
Yeah, man.
It's not like, we don't have piano, we can't make this happen. But when I do my quartet or quintet, the piano is integral because I'll write a lot of stuff. I'll write out a lot of the voicings or written parts. The piano oftentimes will be covering a certain role, like a counterline or whatnot.
Gotcha. So you actually write with the different configurations in mind.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And there's reasons, like sometimes someone said, "Oh, I like this." My album that'll be coming out next year was with my jazz orchestra, and we had this one composition called Cairo Street Ride. From the recent trips I was making, I was like, man, the traffic. If you get in the car, you had the experience. It's like a roller coaster, right?
Yeah.
It's some crazy stuff.
Yeah.
And so in this composition, you've got the main theme going on, and then you've got these other counterlines that reflect like being a cab ride with the Middle Eastern music playing on the cab. You've got the trombone and the tenor doing like this revving of the engine. You've got the other horns doing these car horn beeping.
Yeah. Wow.
So that's how the arrangement, having all those instruments with a 9-piece group, was able to work. Someone said, well, why don't you, I would love for you to do a quartet arrangement of that. I said, it will be tough because that large ensemble arrangement draws on the presence of all those different pieces to make that come to life. So so there's some things that only work in specific size ensembles because of how it's conceived and what is available instrument-wise.
How has the audience received the different? How have they received your music? Like, is it?
Well,
do you find that it's
most people walk out within the first 5 minutes.
Come on.
No, I'm playing. I mean, I feel like I've been successful at seeing my work grow and in its reception, both first locally. I've built a national awareness of my work as well, and
we're gonna talk about some of your achievements.
And I mean, I think just it meant a lot when I've had write up by the New York Times and to see that there's awareness of my work nationally and internationally.
Beautiful.
So slow but steady progress.
Great, man. Now you've talked a lot about your composing and that sort of thing, and you are a self-taught composer, right?
Right.
Okay. Just brief. What inspired you to just want to compose?
I think there was always a presence there. I talked about when I was a kid, my dad listened to classical music, and I played in the band in elementary school and high school. And I remember I would be walking to school, and oftentimes I would kind of hear music in my head.
Beautiful.
And so I think that compositional aspect was there of hearing things, and then getting to the point, when I started going the jazz part, wanting to create and these compositions of my own and figuring it out. Just
Yeah.
learning theory and then figuring out composition.
It's interesting because Ralph Peterson once told me, he said, music is a mirror of the mind. And so when you're saying it takes me back to when he told me that, hearing it in your head. Because I'm at a point where I ain't hearing nothing.
Oh, man.
It's because I'm using another part of my brain. I'm like, and I'm working on some other stuff. So, like, I might get lucky. I might get at the piano and get lucky, but and I remember times when the music would pour out of me.
Yeah.
But right now, ain't nothing pouring out. But
it's interesting, and I feel like at a certain point, there's what kind of organically flows out of us, but then there's also an exercise part of it and a skill part of it. I think about a couple of our colleagues, Eric Kennedy and Herman Burney, great drummer and great bassist.
Yeah.
And they, over recent years, have been really influenced by, I think it's a Brazilian composer that advocates composing every day. And both of those guys have done that over the different years and come close to a composition every day.
Wow.
And so I think the relevance of that is just like we strive to practice every day. And there's a maintenance, there's a growth that comes from that. If you do it on the composing side too, I think it's the same thing. You're developing your ears, your brain, your composing muscles.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that everything you come up with is going to be some wonderful, amazing song. But I definitely find that when I'm in the mode, like, okay, I'm going to spend some time composing, I might sit at the piano for an hour and only come up with a few bars, but I'll collect those fragments. And then I'll try to kind of collage them together and thread them together and come up with a composition for that. So I think that there's a certain exercise of it that can get that part of our brains
develop the muscle
going. Yeah, the muscle.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to send you a check for that one. That's good. That's some good stuff.
Yeah.
Do you have a composing process, or is it the fragments and just?
It's sitting at the piano. That's the majority. There are a few times where I'll come across something on the horn, and I'll write it out. Or now that I've got an iPhone, I'll put the recording thing on and I'll play something. Okay. There's been some times where just in listening to other people, that'll inspire. That's probably the greatest source for me as far as composition. Being inspired, hearing other people.
Gotcha.
There were periods where I talked about the Jason Lindner Big Band, the Joe Henderson Big Band. I remember for a long period of time, I was very much into Billy Harper. And so I remember coming home from Chick-fil-A one day, and I was hearing this kind of theme in my mind. So I called home. This is before I had a cell phone.
Had the answer machine.
Before I had the phone that could record.
Yeah.
So I called home to
left it on the answer
and
machine.
I sang it in there. Yeah, so that's been different ways, but the majority of it is then getting at the piano and figuring out the chords that go along with that melody or that rhythm.
Yeah, it's interesting that you said your dad played classical music around the house, because some of the compositions that I was listening to have an orchestral kind of quality to them, as if they have different movements.
Right.
And it's not just a head tune and we boom. But you basically taking them on a little journey. I took form and analysis. Okay. We had all these, when you listen to a classical piece, trying to understand, the different sections and, all that. But your composition seemed to have it. Well, you think you subconsciously.
Oh yeah, definitely.
That classical stuff is playing into that.
Definitely, I think that part of that journey, that pacing, the movements, the building to a crescendo to a climax point, that definitely is an influence of that classical stuff there.
And at what point did you start adding the Middle Eastern kind of sound?
That's a little over 10 years ago now.
Okay.
I remember asking my dad, saying, "What music do you have from Egypt?" And he actually, when he immigrated, he brought a few records with him. And so he gave me some of that music, and I found that there was a vocalist in particular named Abdel Halim Hafez.
Okay.
Kind of like one of the titans of Middle Eastern music, like a James Brown or an Elvis, right? And Egypt has long been kind of like for film and for music, kind of been like the jewel of the Middle East. And so he was one of these musicians. And even what I found with that is that the music is so much very different. There's a lot of unison, whereas in jazz, we're very much thick on harmony. So it was very constructed very differently. But it resonated with me because, this is culturally significant to my Egyptian identity. But also back to the classical music thing, there's these long compositions and these movements and these different themes. And it's very passionate. A lot of it's like based on love poetry.
Wow.
And so that resonated with me, this approach, and so I've worked to fold that into my work as a composer.
Wow. Man. Beautiful, man. You have 5 recordings under your name?
Sounds about right.
That we know the
Sounds
you had
about
the
right.
Todd Marcus Trio Plus.
That was the last one, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Todd Marcus On These Streets.
That's right, yeah. That was a quintet project, very much a musical portrait of my neighborhood in Baltimore.
Okay. The Todd Marcus Jazz Orchestra Blues for Tahrir? Or
Tahrir. And that's for Tahrir Square in Cairo, where during the Egyptian Revolution in 2011, a lot of the protests were focused. And that's an album that really has a lot of these Middle Eastern influences.
Beautiful. Inheritance. What's that about?
Quartet album with Don Byron on a few songs, featured as a quintet.
Oh, beautiful.
And so that was probably the album in maybe 2012 where I felt like I had really kind of gotten to a point where I had my playing together a little bit more.
Gotcha. In Pursuit of the Ninth Man?
Yeah, that was the debut album back in 2006 with the jazz orchestra.
Beautiful, man.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then a new one coming out in 2022, which will be called In the Valley.
Yeah.
With the jazz orchestra.
And I remember you performed with some of the greatest cats, and I wrote it down. Like you said, Benny Maupin, Don Byron, Larry Willis, Ralph Peterson, Dean Pope, my man from Philly.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Tim Warfield, Sean Jones, George Callaghan, Orrin Evans, Joel Fromm.
Oh, yeah.
Xavier Davis.
Yeah.
Mike Formanek.
Oh, yeah. Mike was in Baltimore for a while.
And Gary Thomas.
Oh, man. That's the guy right there.
Now, do you get nervous when you playing with? Are you pretty centered and grounded?
I mean, I'm centered. And I feel like I'm pretty good at, when I'm working with some of the other greats, just being able to enjoy it.
Yeah.
And I think that perhaps
so you don't let their grandiose levels of playing like make you go into your shit.
Look, if you got to get up and take a solo after Gary Thomas, you're going to be feeling a little small, right? But it's inspiring, and
they're all good people,
Yeah, especially when they're good people, there's that brotherhood.
Yeah.
But I think also there's a certain aspect by being a bass clarinetist. I think that helps take a little of the fellow instrument competition out of the way, right? I suspect, and you could tell me as a saxophonist, like if you up there, another saxophonist comes and takes some place, and I wonder, you have that little competition, and it's like, oh man. Whereas bass clarinetist, I'm in my own kind of little silo.
But you're doing it at a high level, so it's not like you. Well, you're not. You're there, so it's not like the level goes down with.
No. But I think that it perhaps on a psychological level, it's a less of like, oh man, this saxophonist just came and did something as a saxophonist.
Saxophone battle.
Yeah,
I got you.
So I feel like that maybe gives me a little distance just to be able to enjoy something a little more as a different instrument.
Yeah, beautiful. I'm just going to read a few of your professional accomplishment or acknowledgement. Jazz Times. Todd Marcus, one of the few bass clarinetists in modern jazz, has almost made a point of understanding his skill as a player throughout his recording career. And it goes on, but you got the NPR. It talks about your album, Trio Plus. It's a crisp, tight, and varied. It has more good melodies than we can dip into, plus a lot of very good bass clarinet playing. You got stuff from the New York Times. More from the New York Times. Yeah, man. Marcus is clearly what the jazz poets call a rising star. This is back in 2015 as a composer, arranger, and as a bass clarinetist. His solos are highlights of this album. In Marcus's hand, the bass clarinet is no longer a specialty instrument. Wow, its unique timbral richness becomes incisive, fully capable of forceful expression. Yeah, man. Yeah, DC City Paper. In an endlessly fascinating voice from Baltimore, who's captured national attention on the jazz scene, man. You're doing it, my brother.
Thank you, man.
Beautiful stuff.
Thank you.
And you deserve it, man. You know, and you're showing us that through hard work, diligence, and you know, putting your and forward thinking, you know, that you can actually break open doors and create new, you know, possibilities. So beautiful, man.
Thank you,
We got some final questions. We winding down here. You mentioned the intersection of change. Can you tell us what that is?
So that's a community-based nonprofit in my neighborhood in Baltimore.
Okay.
And as I was sharing earlier, our neighborhood is called Sandtown Winchester. We're along historic Pennsylvania Avenue in Baltimore City. And a lot of folks know our neighborhood through the tragedy in 2015 when our community resident, Freddie Gray, died in police custody. And so our community is a historically black community. It was the Harlem of Baltimore for decades. And in the mid-'90s, I was going to school at Loyola in Baltimore, and I was coming and volunteering on the weekends at a chapter of Habitat for Humanity in our neighborhood. And I met one day a lifelong resident, a pastor named Elder C.W. Harris, and we started working together. And he is someone that had grown up in the neighborhood, stayed in the neighborhood when so many others were leaving, and had just started this nonprofit. And I wasn't seeing a path for myself with political science that I was studying at the time. I was feeling passionate about community. I was getting into jazz. I was learning about, you know, the history of our heroes, you know, Mingus, Miles, Coltrane, Max Roach, and the music from the 50s and 60s and how that folded into the social action and history of that time. And here I was learning from Elder Harris, you know, about our community, this black community where a lot of this history took place. Thurgood Marshall, you know, a resident of our neighborhood. So I left school. I didn't see a path for myself with political science. I said, look, I want to be committed to community. I felt passionate about issues of race and ongoing racism. And this is the 90s when it felt like maybe we were making some progress. Counter now, it feels like we're stepping back. But I knew I wanted to be part of community. And so I moved in. I felt like if nothing else, I can be a good neighbor and be part of this fight. And then together with Elder Harris, his wife, Amelia Harris, the three of us are the co-founders of Intersection of Change, where we very actively have worked to fight for our community, to deal with poverty-related challenges. And we have done that. We have 3 programs at Intersection of Change. One is called Martha's Place, which is a recovery program for our women overcoming substance abuse. The second was Jubilee Arts, and that's art classes in all different disciplines, youth entrepreneurial projects using art, community art projects. And then the third is called Strength to Love 2, which runs an 1.5 acre farm in our neighborhood, addresses the food apartheid issue by growing and making produce available in our community, and also does workforce development, you know, to the dynamic that we don't have in our neighborhood the kind of pathways of opportunity and employment or college and whatnot, so to have the kind of alternative and opportunity. So that is the work that we have done. In the process, we've really reclaimed a whole intersection at Pennsylvania Avenue and Prestman Street, where we renovated all the buildings, turned vacant lots into green spaces, and are fighting for our community and as community residents doing that.
Man, salute.
Thank you, man.
Good work, man. Beautiful, man. Because there are a lot of people, they talk, but you're doing it. You're on the ground. You got your boots on the ground.
Yeah.
And thank you for that service
Thank you.
that you're doing. You have actually found your passion, life's passion, in two different areas, but I guess they're all the same.
Yeah, they've overlapped in many ways.
Yeah. So, and that's, man, I think if we can get people, and the older I get, now you gotta understand, I never in my life thought I'd be a teacher, ever. You could never tell me that. I kind of did it just to I said, let me go to, when I graduated with these degrees, I said, well, at least I could make some money teaching, whatever. Yeah. And I got hit, and I've been trying to get out of it ever since I started.
Oh, man.
And 25 years later, still here, and now I have a different attitude.
Yeah.
And now I found the joy in it and I found joy in it. I try to find joy in everything I do.
Right.
But as I get older, I'm learning the importance of service. A lot of times people are trying to, they want to be known, they want to be famous, they want a career. But some of the greatest thing or fulfilling things is service. And it's like, especially as an educator, when you see kids that come back and say, thank you. Right. While you're going through it, you try to get them to sit down and all that. It's rough. It can be rough.
Yeah.
But when you see them come back and really, and you see that, and they can appreciate, maybe something encouraging word you said. And so, and at my age, at our age, we're not going to say how old, but you learn, man, that, like I'm at my age, man, I wake up every day, man, and giving thanks and having gratitude to be in a country. Because I was militant. I was like that for the most part. Yeah. And having been blessed to have traveled and see other places, man, that I can grow up in a place and have a dream, and then I find myself sharing and trying to reach back and help somebody else, and then raising my own kids.
Yeah.
And man, I'm grateful, man. So this idea of service is like a gift that keeps on giving, and it helps me to become a more informed person.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So
I think that's so significant, so important, because obviously as musicians, we love making music. We love performing before people. When we have those moments where we reach our height, artistic height, and the audience is there with us, that's like the transcendent moment of what's powerful about music, where we can reach fulfillment along with the audience. But there's also a dynamic to that, like you said, when you're traveling and performing, you have those moments oftentimes. But there's also loneliness to it. And I think the significance of you being an educator and impacting younger people through those relationships that come from that consistency, the everyday.
Yeah.
We were talking earlier about just the dynamics in our communities where we have brokenness, right?
Yeah.
And to provide stability, to provide that love, that support, is so important.
Yeah.
And it's in an age where we have so much plenty, there's still so much hurt.
Yeah.
And the significance of what you are doing as an educator, what I see my wife doing in a similar boat as an educator, is so important. To me, I'm grateful for that, because that's you as the whole. That's Antonio Parker, the musician, and the person, the man, and the educator that makes up the greatness of the whole.
And it's deep, because when you walked in here today, you were down.
Oh, yeah.
Because of what and I could feel you. But then we start talking.
Yeah.
And I saw a little bit of juice come back.
Yeah.
But that shows that you are passionate about what you do.
Yeah.
And that you really care. And it's not just a lot of stuff you ain't gonna be seen and you ain't gonna get no roses for.
Right.
But you making a difference, man. So that's the beautiful thing.
Yeah. And to be with like-minded human beings that are in this fight, this journey, the artistic one, but also the service one, is meaningful. Yeah, so you picked my spirits up today.
Oh, appreciate that. Oh, man, appreciate you. Good to see you. You got a nice smile, too. All right, we wind it down, man. Okay, you mentioned that you're married. I want to, your wife's name, we want to give her some love. You know.
My wife is Emily.
Emily, you can look at the camera there.
Emily
Hi, Emily. Emily, okay.
Yeah.
Any kids?
No kids.
Okay,
no
okay,
kids.
okay.
So just the two of us,
Okay.
and we live in our neighborhood, and she teaches just one block away. So it's nice the dynamic, the community aspect where her students walk by. Hey, Miss Emily.
Yeah.
Oh, that's Miss Emily's husband.
Okay,
you
yeah.
know.
Okay, beautiful.
So yeah.
All right. So, what's next for Todd Marcus? You mentioned you got a forthcoming CD.
Yeah, I would say what's next is here we are, fall of 2021, and we're still in this hopefully tail end of the pandemic. I have been very cautious throughout this.
Yeah.
And I hope what's next is a resumption of more performing, to be able to do that safely. I would like to get back, not just the local stuff, but more national touring, hopefully making more things overseas happen. I would love to get back over to Egypt next year when the new album comes out. I built a lot of relationships with musicians in Egypt over the last several years, so I want to do some more collaboration with them. And you know, one of the things during the pandemic that I started doing with some of the downtime, I started taking some of my compositions and arranging them with a string quartet.
Wow. Okay.
And I did 4 of those, and I tested them out. I got my piano, bass, and drums and horn, and then a string quartet, and I tested them out.
Wow.
And I really like what came out of that. So I think that I want to write some more, arrange some more, have an album's worth of music. So that'll be something that'll be next as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Our last question.
Okay.
How can people contact you and learn about some of the great things you're doing?
I'd say the best way is still to go to the website, which is toddmarcusjazz.com, and from that, people can link to all the social media aspects. I'm not naturally inclined towards the social media, but I've been trying to make an effort, and I'll make some of my goofy videos, about the music, the process, and everything. So. But going to the website, toddmarcusjazz.com is the place for that. Also, intersectionofchange.org is a place that you can see about our community work in Baltimore City and learn about the different programs, the Martha's Place program, the Strength to Love 2, and the Jubilee Arts programs that we have going on as well.
Beautiful, man. Well, my brother, this has been a good one. Yeah. It's been an honor and a pleasure to be able to just chat it up, man.
Yeah.
You
pulled up my spirits today too.
Thank you, man.
Like you said,
Appreciate you.
dealing with some darkness, and again, just the fact that you're doing this, to have this series, to have these conversations, have the depth to see the insights amongst so many of our colleagues and musicians in the area. I've enjoyed it as a listener and a watcher, and to be here with you today as an interview, I'm grateful for you.
Appreciate you, man. Yeah. And hopefully we can keep it going. And, yeah, man, this is beautiful, man. I felt like I've learned in this time talking things about you that and what it does, man, it makes me appreciate your music even more. I really and I said something about your music that I wanted to say that I didn't get to, but I got to say it about your playing. And we're gonna get to it. See, it's very informal. See, I wanted to tell you this. I really love the way you improvise.
Oh, wow.
You know how to be angular. You know how to use space and timing. You can go out on the edge or outside, and come back in, and, you can swing in the pocket. And you know how to invoke that spiritual quality in the music, and so I'm glad I didn't forget that, because I was checking you out, man. I said, you got that thing, man. You know how to invoke, and that's basically communication. So, Anyway, man.
I'm honored, because you're one of the musicians that I have very great respect for and long have. So that's the ultimate compliment to me. Thank you.
Appreciate you, brother.
Yeah, man.
All right, man. Well, there it is. The one and only, the wonderful bass clarinetist, Mr. Todd Marcus, sharing some of his story with us here on The Conversation in Jazz. And this is A Conversation in Jazz, and we'll see you on the next one.